I would like to say I like your question very much.
I have a question on an issue that you
Okay.
had to do with the Justice Department.
Yes.
And of course, I've heard it said many times that the cause of civil rights is going backwards since President Reagan came to office. And I'm wondering, since we know the Justice Department seemingly has become recalcitrant in terms of enforcing civil rights here at home, civil rights complaints here at home, I'm wondering what we can do as citizens, as individuals, to possibly get those people up at the Justice Department to see that this is something that must be done. We must continue to fight in our counties, in our cities, and so on, against gerrymandering, against redistricting for the sake of diluting minority voting.
Sure. Fine. Well, one of the best things about our nation is that the advocacy of civil rights has been a bipartisan effort. I think that my predecessors in office, Gerald Ford, Richard Nixon, Johnson, and Kennedy, all the way back to Truman and perhaps earlier, were forcefully advocating the enhancement of civil rights. Eisenhower was the one that sent troops into Little Rock to make sure that the schools were integrated in accordance with the Supreme Court ruling and so forth. So it's not a partisan thing. But in complete honesty, I think it's accurate to say that when President Reagan came into office, this policy was reversed. And it's now a generally accepted fact among civil rights groups of all kinds that the Justice Department, if it intervenes, is likely to intervene on the other side of an issue away from those who have in the past been protected by the government. And I might hasten to say that this seems to be quite a popular policy among many voters in this country. But my judgment is that President Reagan would be just as popular if he continued to espouse civil rights as had his Democratic and Republican predecessors. What can be done is a very difficult question to answer. You know, it's obvious that if those whose voice President Reagan hears, or whose voice the Attorney General hears, would speak up for civil rights, that would have a profound impact. But in general, often these voices have been silent. And I hope that different organizations will continue to speak out on behalf of basic civil rights. There is a reaction in this country against government handouts, against welfare programs, against people who are permanently dependent on the government, on those who have in the past been deprived because of segregation or because of civil rights violations. And it's not a popular thing to support a family that is habitually dependent. Aid for families of dependent children and so forth is not a popular program. It's easy to do away with or to reduce the allocation of federal funds for those purposes. And that's just a fact of life. There's another very important element, and that is the so-called quota system has in effect gone out of style. And this is a subject where you can make a darn good case on either side. You know, should Harvard University or Emory University or SMU or Rice set aside a certain number of slots for children of Hispanic families or black families or newcoming Asian families who might not have had the background and the training in the home and in the English language at least to be superior in SAT scores or in high school? Should there be a certain compensatory offering to these young people to let them advance more rapidly? Some say yes, some say no. And I think lately the answer has been no. Previously the answer has been yes. So the argument's on both sides. But I would say that the main thing that we can do, and I haven't answered your question, is that if we are concerned about these things, to continue to speak out as we are trying to do here tonight in the Rothko Chapel. Yes. Well, not knowing, the extent of the punishment, I can't really answer your question. I grew up in a different time, and when I misbehaved in school, I was taken into the principal's office, and almost every child in the Plains High School would know about it. And the principal shut the door, and through the door would come anywhere from 3 to 10 legs with a big board that the principal had. And then I would emerge trying not to weep, depending on my age at the time. And then the principal would call my father on the phone and say, I whipped Jimmy because he did so-and-so. And when I got home, I got another whipping at home. But times have changed, and I think it would mainly have to be determined in accordance with the state law as judged by your legislature and your governor, what sort of corporal punishment would be permitted. I have to say to you in complete honesty, and I'm not answering the question, well, when my 3 boys came along, Jack, Chip, and Jeffrey, on occasion I spanked them quite severely. If they lied to me or if they did something that I thought was contrary to their proper upbringing, I gave them a good paddling. I've never spanked Amy, who came 15 years after our youngest son, Jeffrey. And it would be very distasteful to me if either Rosa or I ever whipped Amy or struck Amy with a board and so forth. So I think that, the times have changed. And I would personally prefer that my children not be beaten in school. Certainly not enough to leave black and blue bruises, as you described. But I don't want to make a judgment on the laws and customs in Texas. They are. So I would say, some of my friends are for it, some of them are against it, and I'm for my friends. I know it's a serious problem. I'm not trying to make a joke out of it, but the times are changing, and I think we're right on the verge now of eliminating corporal punishment in the schools. Yes, sir.
Mr. President, in 1979, you consulted with religious leaders and came to the conclusion that, I quote, we as a people worship self-indulgence and consumption. That was your, what was called the social relations. In 1984, the U.S. bishop consulted with political and academic leaders and came to the same conclusion. My question is, do you think we still suffer as a nation from overindulgence? And secondly, what will have to happen for us to change?
Well, I don't think you quoted my speech. By the way, I never used the word malaise. What I said was that there had been a tearing or a separation of the relationship between the government and the people because of the assassinations of John Kennedy and Robert Kennedy and Martin Luther King Jr., because of the embarrassment of Watergate and the withdrawal from Vietnam. The people had lost confidence in their government. And that the purpose of a government should be to act effectively. I was talking about energy legislation specifically, and our energy secretary is sitting in front of me, Charles Duncan. And I said that the best way to show that a powerful nation like ours can heal this breach between the people and its government is for the government to act, to quit wasting energy and indulging ourselves to the detriment of our own nation's future. And as a result of that speech, which is, by the way, one of the most popular speeches I ever made, the Congress did indeed act, and we finally passed a good energy package and eliminated a lot of the waste of energy that had made us vulnerable because of uncertain supplies from the Persian Gulf region. So that was the background of that particular speech. But to get back to the present time, it's not right, either under God's laws or the laws of human beings, for the people of our country to assume that we can be wasteful in our consumption just because we are superior to others, that somehow we are special children of God, and those whom we don't like very much are children of the devil, that because we're mostly white folks and because we have almost unbounded riches, that we deserve to be treated in a superior fashion. I believe that we should make a strong effort to understand others who are less blessed and to share with them. I think this is the kind of thing that strengthens our nation. You don't have to look at modern times to see the essence of human rights. I think Harry Truman was by far the strongest and most effective proponent of human rights that we've ever had in the White House. He spoke frequently about it. He equated human rights advocacy or championship in Washington with peace on earth. And he put it into practical application by strongly supporting the United Nations and by looking at defeated enemies in Japan, Germany, and Italy with compassion. He had people advocating to him that we be permanently punitive to the Nazis and to the Italians and to the Japanese who had attacked us. He said, no, let's rebuild our country. Let's give them freedom. And this was a matter of great sharing. The Marshall Plan, which Truman characteristically did not call the Truman Plan. He could have. Rebuilt our enemies and rebuilt Europe. And it was a tremendous benefit to our country as we were benevolent. And I think that we are facing a time in the future, and George Mitchell has said this much more eloquently than I, when we're going to have the first test of a disparity between riches and poverty between ourselves and Mexico, for instance, or Haiti. There are some inexorable changes taking place on earth with the population explosion, with the destruction of forest land because people cannot afford to buy oil, and they heat and cook food on trees, and then the soil erodes, and food is more scarce. And there's a sociological fact which I deplore, that the poorer a family is, the more children it will have. It's kind of a vicious cycle, and eventually these pressures are going to put on us the consequences of our inattention. So it's not a matter of our staying isolated the rest of our lives and saying we've got ours to hell with the rest of them. It's a matter of sharing with them as an investment. I didn't say that well enough when I made my original statements. So I think that we should not overconsume, we should not be wasteful, we should be generous, we should be caring, we should be knowledgeable, not just to be beneficent and to congratulate ourselves, but to create a better world for us, our children, and our grandchildren.
President Carter has agreed that I be the voice for several of you who have taken the option of writing out your questions instead of expressing them by voice. It will interest you to know there's a certain shape to these questions. There are more on Nicaragua and on a particular city ordinance that's up for discussion here now in Houston than there are than the total of questions that are here. And I think we can leave to the President as to whether he wants to comment on local legislation. He said he was going to leave that to Texans, but I understand that is a lively issue. If he wishes to comment, it's his privilege. As for Nicaragua and the situation of human rights in Nicaragua and the position of the U.S. government with regard to that situation, I'd like to simply put those there if the President wishes to remark about them. Let me call particular attention to a wonderful question from a young man who was telephoned at about 7:45 p.m., March 27, 1980, when he, the young man, was in the 7th grade. The call came from President Carter. He said, "I'd spent about a year trying to get hold of you. Needless to say, I admired you more than anyone in the world, and I still do. When you took time out to call a 13-year-old kid in Friendswood, Texas, you did more for me in that 15-minute phone conversation than you could imagine." Then he goes on to talk about the questions you asked him, which were not very easy. They had to do with Iran and the Texas primaries. And he then says, let me go on. He's here tonight. He's no longer in the 7th grade. I will not cite him unless he wishes to stand up and take credit for this question, for this, for this letter, which is an excellent letter. He says, let me go on to say I believe that you were one of our best presidents, first of all, and he gives good reasons. Logical, anyway. You got the country to conserve energy, which was crucial, underlined. If America hadn't become energy conscious, who knows what oil prices would be at now. Second of all, it's amazing that anyone was able to get Egypt and Israel to sit down together. That was another issue which was crucial. A war was inevitable if they hadn't sat down and negotiated seriously. And thirdly, thanks to you, 52 American hostages are alive today. Now, a question from someone else, and it's short. Would you comment on Ambassador Young's statement that, quote, the United States, too, has political prisoners, unquote? Do you object to the statement? This is a loaded question. Do you object to the statement because it was untrue or because it was inappropriate? Do you want to handle that one, Mr. President? All right, sir.
I saw a few people flinch around the front rows when they talked about the low oil prices, and what we worked for was stable oil prices, right, Charlie? We weren't trying to lower them too much. Well, I think I never have talked to Andy Young about this statement, with which I disagreed. I think he made it when he was in the United Nations. But I think what Andy was trying to do there was to let some of the nations around the world understand that we still have problems here at home. And there were those who were being held prisoner then in North Carolina, I remember, for instance, who had taken on violence as a means to bring about so-called civil rights reform. And they had been arrested and were being tried. I did not agree with the statement then. I don't believe that our nation has political prisoners as such. But I think you have to understand a fact. I think about 6 weeks ago, I taught a Sunday school lesson from, I think, Romans 8, I'm not sure about the exact text, where Paul, in a very remarkable passage, advises Christians to honor their secular government. Honor your own political leaders, he said, in effect, in 6 or 7 verses. It's not anywhere else in the Bible. And the essence of this is that whenever we have a choice, if we can possibly do it, commensurate with our own conscience or the laws of God as we interpret them, support our government. Even though we might have partisan differences, I don't like quite the method they're taking, it's an obligation for Christians and for others to support our own government, to be loyal to our own government. But I think that we have to remember also that Paul suffered years in prison in Rome, and he died in prison. And all the disciples did except one. And Christ himself died because he did not let secular leaders force him to do something he did not want to do, because he thought it was a violation of God's law. So there are times when there has to be some element of civil disobedience. When we do decide on civil disobedience, which should be very rare, then we should be prepared to take the consequences under the laws of Texas or Georgia or the United States. So to summarize, there are those who have been in prison, including Andy Young himself and Martin Luther King Jr. himself, who was in prison in Americus, Georgia, my county seat, because he did not agree with the then existing laws that mandated legally segregation and which in effect kept blacks from having a right to vote. That, I think, is what Andy was talking about. So it's a difficult question to answer. So to recapitulate so you don't misunderstand me, if there is a violation in your mind of God's law, only then should you disobey your nation's laws. And if you do so, you should be prepared to take the consequences. The consequences can only consist of two things, ultimately. One is the loss of your freedom, and the other one is the loss of your life, your earthly life. And sometimes, in a case of martyrdom, beliefs might be that deep. But as you can see, that would be a very rare thing. That's a difficult question. I rarely get a new question. That's the first time I ever heard that question.
The President has agreed to take one more, and I'd like to read it from here. I've just changed my mind. I'm going to take it from here, after which I want to read a question that has been brought up that doesn't require an answer, and that'll close the evening. May I take this question as the last one, please? Yes.
Let me answer it in general terms and also about the Baha'is in Iran. I'm familiar with their case, as you know, but I have to point out to you that neither I nor President Reagan have any influence on the government of Iran. And so it's not easy to give you any answer that would engender hope about our protecting the Baha'is in Iran. This is obviously a case of unwarranted persecution by the Iranians on this religious group. In general, however, the prevention of suffering is something that our nation should do. And I referred to it earlier in my talk. It's not related to religious groups. I have to forewarn you. It's grievous and somewhat embarrassing that we would not understand what is going on now on earth. We prepared, after 3 years of effort, with all the major agencies of my government, your government, what we call the Global 2000 Report, which tried to assess all the factors that affect the quality of life of people on earth. Sometimes we didn't have enough information. We had to make guesses, but we made the best guesses we could about how population is going to change in the future. Not only in our country, which is fairly stable, not only in West Germany, which is going down, but in countries like Mexico and Egypt, where it's going up very rapidly. And what's going to happen when we run out of food for those people? And what's going to happen when the land won't produce anymore? Or when air or water pollution becomes unbearable, or fresh water supplies are gone, or all the trees are cut down, and formerly productive land becomes desert? You know, what are we going to do? We can't build a Berlin Wall around the United States and keep people out. And I think more and more people are going to come from Haiti, from Cuba, from other countries to the south, even including Mexico. And so we are involved in the problem, even though we don't want to be. And I think for us to understand as American people the facts about now and what we believe will be the facts in the future is a crucial challenge. And it's an exciting challenge because it not only involves how human beings feel about one another and how we inventory all the great assets we have which we're not using, but it also lets us use the highest stages of technology, of social science and theology, of statesmanship, agriculture, education. It's the greatest challenge that the world faces now. And so I think that somewhere in our country there should be an ability to say what's going to happen in the future. Let me go on two more steps forward. One is that there are practical consequences of this that we are just beginning to feel, but which we don't want to recognize. The rest of the world owes, the third world owes, the developing world owes about $1,000 billion to the rich countries, mostly to the United States. They'll never pay it back. We're now lending them enough money to pay the interest on what they owe. And American banks are increasing their loans overseas about 5% a year, just so they won't have to mark up the debts as bad debts. Well, why? All of a sudden, the bankers and the governments haven't lost leave of their senses. And the borrowers haven't all of a sudden had a revolutionary change and want to borrow more money. The fact is that those countries are now, because of some of the things I just described to you, are not able to pay back. I want to see Argentina, a new democracy with human rights for a change, survive. While I was down there, I met with the chairman of their federal bank, like the Federal Reserve Bank in the country. And they told me that they just signed a new agreement with the International Monetary Fund the week before. It was about the first week in October. It would take 75% of all their exports just to pay the interest on their debt. Well, there's a limit to how long they can do this. So one of the things that this change is causing, because they're destroying land and destroying timber, is that they can't pay their debts. They can't feed their own people. And we're seeing this in Ethiopia. And the second thing that directly affects us, I'm discounting the problem with Mexico now, is revolution. When people are faced with a hopeless future, when a mama and daddy have got a little baby that's starving to death, and that family has to choose between bread and freedom, they'll choose bread. And I'm not sure what I would do. I might choose bread for my child if it was starving. So this is a threat to democracy. It's a threat to freedom. It's a threat to the integrity of our nation's influence on earth. And I think it's time for us, overtime for us, to say, what are we going to do about it? And the point I want to make, I've made it about 3 times already, is it's not just a handout. It's not just charity. It's an investment in our own future to share our wealth, to share our influence, to share our knowledge, to share our freedom, to share our human rights, to share our food. And who's going to make the decision? It's the big shots in this country like you and me. The people who are able to come to Rothko Chapel. The people who are able to listen to a lecture. The people that have got our kids in good schools. The people who don't have to go home hungry. You know, that's the point I'm trying to make. It's just as much your responsibility as it is mine. And I think that is a thing that can epitomize or dramatize the greatness of the United States of America. Is how we handle our strength. We're the most powerful nation on earth, militarily, politically, economically, and I hope morally. But how do you use that strength? In a selfish way? God knows, I hope not. In a sharing way? I hope so. And that's the essence of human rights, is sharing and compassion and understanding and communication, brotherhood, sisterhood, love.
To close the evening, and to thank President Carter on behalf of this wonderful chapel and all of us here for this tremendous evening, let me read a note just sent to me by one of you. Dear President Carter, I'm so happy to hear and see you. I'm 3 years ago came from Moscow, Russia. When we were in Moscow and wait permission to come here, you, your words, voice everything what we try find or hear from Voice of America or from Magazine America was for us important as life. My mother, children, and me, all my family, what I brought in your country, love and respect you forever for all what you did and do for people, for us. Thank you from bottom of my heart for your so only warm, light, and kind soul. We ask God each day for happy and healthy for you and your family.